You hear about Vikings crossing oceans like it was nothing. Dragon ships, fierce warriors, unbreakable men sailing into legend. But there's a story nobody talks about. The families, the women, the children, the livestock. All crammed onto open wooden vessels, sailing toward a frozen island they'd never seen, betting everything on one man's promise of Greenland. Summer of 985, 25 ships leave Iceland. By the time they see Greenland, only 14 arrive. 11 ships, gone. That's not warriors dying in battle. That's families, entire bloodlines, wiped out mid-ocean. No graves, no markers, just cold water and the people who loved them, wondering what their last moments felt like. If you value documented Viking history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the saga of Eric the Red, preserved in the 14th century Hauksbok manuscript, housed at the Arnamagnæan Institute in Copenhagen. Archaeological findings from the Eastern Settlement excavations, conducted by Danish archaeologist Jette Arneborg at the National Museum of Denmark between 2012 and 2016, and maritime reconstruction data from the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde, documented in their 2007 Sea Stallion Voyage Report. Now back to the information. Erik Thorvaldsson, Eric the Red, born around 950 in Rogaland, Norway. Red hair, red beard, temper to match. His father, Thorvald Asvaldsson, got exiled from Norway for manslaughter when Eric was 10. The family sailed to Hornstrandir in northwestern Iceland. Harsh land, rocks and ice. Eric grew up violent. By 982, he'd killed servants belonging to a neighbor named Valthjof. After those servants died in a landslide, Eric's people triggered. Then Eric killed Eyjolf the Foul and another man named Holmgang Hrafen when they came for revenge, got himself banished from Haukadale, moved to Oxney Island, lent his Setstokker, sacred ancestral beams, to a man named Thorgest. When Thorgest refused to return them, Eric ambushed him. 2 of Thorgest's sons died in the fight. At the Thorsnes Thing in 982, Eric got sentenced, full outlawry, 3 years, leave Iceland or die. Most outlaws crawled to Norway or Denmark. Eric went west. He'd heard tales of land spotted a century earlier by Gunnbjørn Ulfsson, a sailor blown off course. Gunnbjørn saw skerries, rocky islands between Iceland and Greenland around 877 but never landed. Then, in the early 900s, a man named Snebjørn Galti tried settling on those skerries. The colony lasted months. Everyone killed each other. Only 2 survived to sail home. That's the land Eric chose, the place where settlers murdered each other before winter ended. Eric left Iceland in 982 with his wife Theodild. Their children including young Leif, a handful of slaves, and livestock. His ship rounded the southern tip of Greenland, now called Cape Farewell. After drift ice blocked the eastern approach, he found fjords, deep ones, to Nulirfik, Eric's fjord. In summer, grass grew thick enough for livestock. Seals crowded the water. The sagas say he spent winter on Eiriksey Island, then a second winter at Eiriksholmar. He explored north as far as Snæfell. When his 3-year sentence expired in 985, he sailed back to Iceland. He named the place Greenland, not because it was green, because he needed people to come. Iceland in 985 was crowded. Farms subdivided between sons until plots couldn't feed families. Feuds over land turned bloody. The Althing, Iceland's assembly, saw constant cases about boundaries and insults and killings. When Eric arrived talking about Greenland, people listened. Fjords that could hold hundreds of farms. Hunting grounds with walrus herds so thick you walked on them. Seals, caribou, no angry neighbors, no king taking taxes, just empty land waiting. Over 400 people agreed to go. 25 ships. The sagas recorded in the Hauksbok manuscript state that Eric led a fleet carrying men, women, children, cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, horses, chickens, dogs. Everything needed to build a new society. The Landnámabók, the Book of Settlements, confirms the fleet size and mentions Eric's persuasion convinced entire extended families to leave Iceland permanently. These weren't raiding ships. These were Nars, cargo vessels, 16 meters long, 4.6 meters wide, 1 meter draft, square sails of 90 square meters made from wool treated with horse fat, open decks, half decks fore and aft for cargo and minimal shelter. Clinker-built oak planks overlapped and riveted. The Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde estimates a typical Nar could carry 24 tons of cargo and required a crew of 6 to 15. But for the Greenland voyage, ships were overloaded. Families, livestock, food stores, tools, seeds, looms, everything. The crossing from Iceland to Greenland measured roughly 240 nautical miles at the narrowest point, but ships couldn't sail direct. Prevailing westerlies forced them south around Cape Farewell before turning north into protected fjords. The Saga of Eric the Red states, "The voyage normally took several days in good conditions, but 985 didn't give good conditions. Picture the ships, no cabins, no shelter, families huddled on open decks between livestock, children pressed against their mothers, salt spray constantly soaking everyone. The Nars rode low in the water when fully loaded, maybe 16 inches of freeboard according to replica trials. Waves broke over the sides. People bailed constantly. At night they couldn't beach the ships mid-ocean, so they slept where they sat, hudfat, leather sleep sacks, kept you marginally dry, but marginally wasn't enough when you're wet for days. Temperature was the killer, even in summer. North Atlantic water temperature near Iceland ranges from 4 to 10 degrees Celsius according to modern oceanographic data. Air temperature may be 8 to 12 degrees. Doesn't sound deadly until you're soaked. Hypothermia doesn't need freezing temperatures, just wet and cold and wind. Your core temperature drops, you shiver, then you stop shivering, then you stop thinking clearly, then you stop. The ships had no heat source. Fire on a wooden vessel packed with people and animals? Impossible. Food was dried fish, salted meat, hardtack, sour milk in leather bags, all cold. The Sea Stallion reconstruction voyage in 2007, documented by the Viking Ship Museum, reported crew members struggling with cold even in July, wearing multiple wool layers and still shivering during night watches. And that crew had modern backup. The families in 985 had nothing. The sagas say 11 ships didn't make it. That's 44% of the fleet. The sources distinguish between ships that turned back and ships that were lost. Some captains saw the conditions and said no, ran back to Iceland, lived, but others kept going and vanished. What takes a ship? Storms, obviously. North Atlantic summer storms generate waves 15 to 20 feet high routinely. The modern research by Professor William Doolittle from the University of Texas and Professor Stephen Stadler from Oklahoma State University, published in 2023, analyzed historical climate data and confirmed that even in the warmer climate of the late 10th century yachts, sudden storms could develop with little warning. The 985 voyage likely hit a low-pressure system, winds 40, 50 knots, seas building. A Nar loaded to capacity can't maneuver fast. The square sail catches wind but can't tack upwind effectively. If wind shifts wrong, you're in trouble. Imagine you're on one of those ships. Let's say you're a woman named Gudrid, common name in Iceland then, 20 years old, married, pregnant. Your husband convinced you Greenland meant a future for your family. You're on deck with 30 other people, your 2-year-old son clinging to your leg, surrounded by panicking sheep and a cow that hasn't stopped bellowing since you left sight of land. The ship rises on a wave, 15 feet up. You see the horizon tilt, then down. The bow slams into the trough. Water crashes over everyone. Your son screams. You can't hear him over the wind. Your husband's at the oars with 5 other men trying to keep the bow into the waves. But they're exhausted. Been rowing for hours. The sails reefed tight but still catching too much wind. The ship heels. 20 degrees. 30. Water pours over the low side. The saga mentions ships that turned back. Those captains saw conditions and made the call. 14 ships arrived. How many turned back? The sagas don't give exact numbers. Maybe 3 or 4 turned back. That means 7 or 8 ships went down. 7 or 8 ships with maybe 30 people each. Over 200 people. Gone. What actually kills you when a Nar sinks in the North Atlantic? Not drowning, usually. Hypothermia gets you first. Water temperature maybe 6 degrees Celsius. You hit that water, you've got 10 minutes of useful movement. 20 minutes before you lose consciousness. 90 minutes maximum survival time according to modern cold water immersion data. But most don't last that long. The shock of cold water causes involuntary gasping. You inhale water. Even if you don't, your muscles stop working. Can't swim, can't hold on to debris, just cold, then nothing. Children go faster. Smaller bodies lose heat quicker. The 2-year-old on your lap, and water that cold. Maybe 5 minutes before hypothermia incapacitates him. You try to hold him above water, keep his head up, but your arms stop working. You can't maintain grip. He slips away. That's how families died, not together. Separated by waves and cold and failing bodies, livestock added chaos. When a ship starts sinking, animals panic. A cow weighs 300 to 400 kilograms, thrashing in confined space. Horses worse. They'd crush people trying to get away from water. Some ships probably capsized not from waves, but from animals shifting cargo weight. The ship lists. Everyone runs to the high side. That makes it worse. More list, more panic. Then over. Some ships may have broken apart. The Viking Ship Museum analysis of clinker construction shows the hulls were flexible by design. They bent with waves. But overloaded ships stressed joints. Rivets could pop, planks could separate. Water floods in. The ship doesn't sink dramatically. It settles, lower and lower. People bail but can't keep up. Within minutes, you're standing in water to your waist, then your chest. The ship's still technically afloat, but everyone's in the water now, clinging to the hull as it goes down. Did anyone from the lost ships survive? Probably not. The ships that made it to Greenland would have searched for stragglers if they thought anyone lived. Eric wouldn't abandon people, but the sagas mention no survivors from lost vessels, no rescue, just 14 ships arriving. 400 people total reached Greenland according to most sources. That means roughly 180 people who left Iceland never arrived. 180 people. Let's break that down. If each lost ship carried typical settlement demographics, you'd have maybe 10 to 12 families per vessel. Each family might be parents, 2 or 3 children, maybe grandparents, plus slaves, thralls. Most farms had 2 or 3 thralls. So per ship, 25 to 35 people, times 8 ships lost, 200 to 280 people. The sagas undercounted. Who were these people? Not warriors, farmers, weavers, mothers, children. The Islandingabok and Landnamabok record some family names from the settlement period. Herjolf Bardarson sailed to Greenland. His son Bjarni would later sight North America. Herjolf made it, but the sagas don't name most settlers, especially not the ones who died. History remembers Eric. History remembers Leif, the 200 people who drowned. Anonymous, except archaeology gives hints. Excavations at the eastern settlement, Eystrabygd, near modern Qaqortoq, conducted between 1992 and 2016 by teams from the National Museum of Denmark, found grave goods suggesting settlers came from mixed backgrounds. Some graves held weapons indicating warrior class, others held weaving tools, spindle whorls, looms. Those belonged to women. Textile production was women's work in Norse society. The Viking Age historian Judith Jesch documented in her 1991 work, Women in the Viking Age, that a skilled woman could spin enough yarn for 1 day's weaving in 35 hours. Making clothing was constant labor. The women who died on those ships carried those skills Greenland needed to survive. Children's graves at the eastern settlement show high mortality. Roughly half the population was under 15, according to demographic reconstructions by bioarchaeologist Andrew Dugmore in 2006. Of those who reached 20, only half made it to 50. Life expectancy, maybe 35 to 40 years total, but children under 5 face the highest risk: disease, accidents, cold. The children on those ships in 985 never got the chance to become those statistics. They died before touching Greenland soil. The livestock deaths meant economic disaster for some families. Let's say you sold everything in Iceland to pay for passage and buy breeding animals. 3 cows, 10 sheep, a horse. That's your investment in Greenland's future. Your plan was to build a farm, breed the animals, sell surplus to new arrivals. But if your ship goes down, you've lost everything. Even families on ships that survived but lost livestock faced ruin. The saga of the Greenlanders mentions Eric establishing farms at Brattahlid in Eriksfjord, and others settling the western settlement near modern Nuuk. Those farms needed animals. Families who arrived without livestock became dependents, laborers, thralls in all but name. If you value documented Viking and maritime history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. I'll also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched using archaeological reports from the Greenland National Museum excavations published in Arctic Anthropology Volume 56 in 2019, and demographic studies from the Comparative Island Ecodynamics in the North Atlantic Project, findings published in the Journal of the North Atlantic in 2016. Now back to the information. Eric's fleet left in summer, probably July or early August when weather windows opened. The voyage should have taken 7 to 10 days with favorable winds, but the North Atlantic doesn't care about should. The saga of Eric the Red states simply that of 25 ships. Only 14 arrived, with some turning back and others lost. That's the entire account. No details about which ships, no names of the lost, just numbers. But think about Eric's psychology. He's leading this. 400 people trusted him. He'd seen Greenland in good weather during his 3-year exile. He'd sailed there and back twice without major incident. So when he said it was safe, people believed him. Then 11 ships don't make it. That's not bad luck. That's catastrophic failure. Eric built the colony, became the chieftain, lived at Brattahlid until roughly 1000 or 1002, according to saga accounts. Did he think about those lost ships? The families who trusted him? The sagas don't say, but he had to know. The 14 ships that made it established the eastern and western settlements. Brattahlid became the center, Eric's farm. Eventually a church, though Eric himself stayed pagan. His wife, Theodild, converted to Christianity early and commissioned Greenland's first church at Brattahlid. Excavations in 1961 by Danish archaeologist Age Roussel found the church foundation, tiny structure, maybe 2 meters by 3 meters, but it represented faith, hope. The people who died on the voyage never got to see that. Greenland wasn't easy for survivors either. Winter temperatures dropped below minus 20 Celsius. Summer barely reached 10 degrees. Growing season, maybe 3 months. You couldn't grow grain. Barley might survive, but didn't thrive. Diet was meat, fish, seals, caribou. Isotope analysis of bones from Eastern settlement graves, conducted by researchers at the University of Copenhagen in 2014, showed marine protein comprised 50 to 80% of Norse Greenlander diets by the 13th century. They became dependent on the sea, just like the sea that killed their companions on the crossing. The settlement lasted roughly 500 years. The eastern settlement died out around 1450. The western settlement abandoned earlier, around 1350. Various theories explain the decline. Climate change, the Little Ice Age reduced growing season further, economic collapse, walrus ivory lost value when African elephant ivory flooded European markets in the 14th century. Violence, some scholars argue Thule-Inuit conflicts drove Norse out, though archaeological evidence is thin. But one factor was population. The colony never grew large. Peak population maybe 5,000 people. Compare that to Iceland's 30,000 plus. Greenland stayed marginal, vulnerable, and it started with those 11 ships. 180 to 200 people who should have been parents and grandparents to future generations, gone before arrival. The demographic impact compounded over generations. If each lost family would have had 3 children survive to adulthood, and those children had 3 each, within a century you're missing thousands of potential settlers. The colony might have survived if it had been bigger, stronger. More people to hunt, more people to trade, more genetic diversity. But those people drowned in 985. Some historians argue the lost ships turned back successfully and just aren't mentioned because they didn't reach Greenland. Maybe. But turning back meant rowing or sailing against westerly winds for 240 nautical miles. With exhausted crews, low food, damaged sails, the probability of successful return decreases dramatically once you're halfway across. Most captains who turned back probably did so within sight of Iceland. The ones who kept going past the point of no return either made it or died. Modern reconstructions give context. The Sea Stallion from Glendalough, a replica of Skuldeleve II, a 30-meter warship, sailed from Roskilde, Denmark, to Dublin, Ireland in 2007. The voyage covered roughly 1,000 nautical miles and took about 7 weeks, including stops. The ship carried a crew of 65. They encountered storms, rough seas. One crew member described 24-hour shifts rowing through gales. Everyone's soaked, hands bleeding from rope burns, and that's a warship, built for speed and maneuverability. With a full crew, with modern weather forecasts, with support vessels, so the NARS in 985 had none of that. Just overloaded cargo ships packed with families trying to reach an island most had never seen. The Skuldeleve ships, 5 Viking vessels deliberately sunk in Roskilde Fjord around 1060 to block the channel, provide archaeological evidence of ship construction and use. Excavated between 1957 and 1962, the ships showed extensive repairs. Planks replaced, rivets doubled. These ships worked hard. They wore out. The NARS in Eric's fleet were probably similar. Used vessels, repaired multiple times. Maybe some were new built for the voyage. But most were existing ships pressed into service. Older ships, weaker joints, higher risk. Ship maintenance in the Viking Age required constant attention. The Herstwick Historical Combat Society research notes that ships needed to be pulled ashore regularly to dry and prevent rot. Seawater and marine organisms, particularly teredo worms. Mentioned in Eirik's Saga Rauda, when Bjarni's ship got infested returning from Vinland, could destroy hulls. A ship that hadn't been properly maintained before the 985 voyage might look fine in harbor, but fail under stress. Planks separating, seams opening, water flooding in faster than crews could bail. The human cost extended beyond the drowned. Survivors carried trauma. Imagine you're on one of the 14 ships that made it. You watched another ship sink. Maybe you were close enough to see faces, hear screams, close enough to see people in the water, waving, but your ship couldn't stop. If you stopped, you'd risk your own vessel. So you sailed past, left them. That's survivor's guilt for the rest of your life. Children who survived the crossing would have remembered. A 5-year-old seeing his friend's family disappear underwater. That stays with you. The Eastern Settlement archaeological record shows evidence of mental distress and skeletal remains, healed fractures from falls, signs of chronic stress. Hard life in Greenland caused physical damage. But the psychological damage from the crossing, that's invisible. No bones show fear. The sagas recorded by Ari the Wise in the Islendingabok around 1125 mention Eric's settlement matter-of-factly. Number of ships. Number of arrivals. But Ari wrote nearly 150 years after the events. He compiled oral traditions. By then, the lost ships were just footnotes, numbers, not people. The further you get from tragedy, the easier it becomes to forget the dead were real. But they were real. Every one of those 180 people had names, had families in Iceland who waited for news that never came, had skills and dreams and children. A woman who wove the finest cloth in her district, a man who could navigate by stars, a child who loved horses, all gone because they believed Eric's promise of Greenland. The Greenland colony eventually developed trade networks. Walrus ivory became their primary export. The Eastern Settlement hunters traveled north to Disco Bay, 600 miles from the settlement, on seasonal expeditions lasting weeks or months. They hunted walrus, narwhal, polar bears. Risky work. Men died regularly, but it was necessary. Ivory bought tools and wood and grain from Europe. The colony survived by trading, but it never thrived, never grew beyond a few thousand people scattered across 2 settlements. By 1408, the last documented contact with Europe, a wedding in Falsey Church between Sigridur Björnsdottir and Thorstein Olafsson. Both had arrived from Iceland 2 years earlier. The wedding was recorded in Icelandic annals because the priest documented it. After that, silence, no ships from Norway, no trade. The colony died slowly. When Europeans returned in the 1500s, they found ruins, empty farms, churches with no congregations. The last Norse Greenlander probably died around 1450, 500 years after Eric's settlement. 500 years of struggling against cold and isolation and economic collapse. And it started with 14 ships, should have been 25. Did those 11 ships matter? Absolutely. Population genetics research shows small founding populations create bottlenecks. Less genetic diversity means higher vulnerability to disease and environmental stress. The Norse Greenland population descended from roughly 400 people. If it had been 600, if those 11 ships had made it, genetic diversity increases by 50%, disease resistance improves, birth outcomes improve, colony stability improves. Maybe Greenland survives the Little Ice Age. Maybe it doesn't. But the margin of survival was thin enough that 200 extra people could have tipped the balance. Isotope analysis from graves at the Eastern Settlement reveals another factor. Strontium isotope ratios in tooth enamel indicate geographic origin. Teeth form in childhood, locking in local geology. Several skeletons show isotope signatures from Scotland, Orkney, the Hebrides. These were people born in Norse-controlled British territories who migrated to Iceland, then Greenland, multi-generational migration, complex networks. And among those networks, families disappeared in 985 without leaving isotope traces in Greenland because they drowned before arrival. The walrus ivory trade tells part of the story. Peak hunting happened in the 12th and 13th centuries. Disco Bay expeditions brought back tons of ivory annually. Greenland ivory appeared in medieval European churches, carved into religious objects, decorating royal halls. Then African elephant ivory entered the market in the 14th century. Cheaper, more available. Greenland ivory couldn't compete. Prices collapsed. The economic foundation crumbled. Trade ships stopped coming. By 1400, maybe one ship every few years. By 1450, none. The colony died because it lost economic viability. But would a larger population have helped? More hunters meant more ivory. More ivory meant better trade terms. Maybe enough to survive competition from African ivory. Maybe. But the 11 lost ships ensured Greenland started weak. Eric brought 400 people. Thriving colonies need thousands. The Icelandic settlement in the 8th and 9th centuries brought maybe 20,000 Norse to the island. That's critical mass. Greenland never reached critical mass, and losing 200 people before landing made it worse. Climate data from ice cores extracted from Greenland ice sheet tell environmental stories. The samples analyzed by researchers at the University of Copenhagen showed temperature fluctuations over the past 2,000 years. The medieval warm period from roughly 900 to 1300 brought temperatures 1 to 2 degrees Celsius above baseline. That's why Eric found grass in 985. But the Little Ice Age started around 1300. Temperatures dropped 3 to 4 degrees Celsius. Growing season shortened. Sea ice expanded. Hunting became harder. Stormier seas. More dangerous voyages. The 14 ships that arrived in 985 came during optimal climate. The settlers who survived faced deteriorating conditions their children's children couldn't overcome. Eric died around 1000 or 1002. Accounts vary. Some say he died in an epidemic that hit Greenland after Leif's return from Vinland. Others say injury from falling off a horse. Either way, Eric lived long enough to see his settlement establish itself. Built Brattahlid, raised his children. Leif became the first European to reach North America. Thorvald died in Vinland, fighting natives. Thorstein died trying to recover Thorvald's body. Freydis led an expedition to Vinland and murdered her partners. Eric's family achieved fame, but Eric also lived with the knowledge of 11 ships lost, 200 people dead because they followed him. The medieval climate was warming during Eric's time. Good for settlement, bad for teaching caution. The warm period made people confident, made them think Greenland was stable, safe, but climate shifts. The warm period ended. The colony couldn't adapt fast enough. Neither could Iceland fully. Population dropped from 150,000 in 1250 to 53,000 in 1703 due to plague, famine, volcanic eruptions. But Iceland survived. Greenland didn't. The Falsey Church ruins remain the best preserved Norse structure in Greenland, built around 1300. Stone walls still standing. It's where that 1408 wedding happened, the last documented Norse presence. Standing in those ruins today, you see what survived, stone, but the people are gone, just like the people who drowned in 985. Some died quickly, some died slowly, all died. Excavations at farms around the eastern settlement found evidence of desperation in the final years. Animal bones show cattle, sheep, goats, traditional livestock, replaced increasingly by seals. In the last layers, before abandonment, archaeologists found gnawed bones, bone marrow extracted, skin scraped from hides that normally would have been preserved. Signs of starvation. The final Norse Greenlanders ate their animals down to nothing, then had nothing left. Some might have tried sailing to Iceland. No records exist of successful escape. Maybe they drowned too, just like the ships in 985. The ocean doesn't care about timing. Modern climate change brings new archaeological discoveries. Permafrost melts, artifacts emerge. In 2018, archaeologists found a previously unknown farm site near the eastern settlement. Preserved wood, leather, textiles. Intact, because ice kept them frozen for 6 centuries. But the melting ice means those artifacts degrade rapidly once exposed. We're in a race against time to document Greenland's Norse past before warming destroys the evidence. Ironic. The colony died partly because climate cooled. Now warming erases what's left. But here's the thing that sits cold in your chest. In 1999, archaeologists excavating a mass grave near Narsarsuaq found skeletal remains of Norse settlers. Multiple individuals buried together. Isotope analysis dated the bones to the 14th century, colony's final phase. But the bones showed no signs of violence, no cut marks, no fractures. These people weren't killed, they just died. Famine, disease, cold, and someone buried them together before leaving. Or maybe the ones who buried them died too. Shortly after, mass graves mean catastrophe. Community collapse. The grave at Narsarsuaq holds maybe 8 to 10 individuals, but it mirrors the mass deaths at sea in 985. Just slower, on land instead of water. But the same outcome. Families gone. The names of the lost don't survive, but their absence shaped everything. The farms that weren't built, and the children who weren't born, the skills that disappeared. Every genealogy in Greenland's eastern settlement traces to those 400 who arrived, not the 200 who drowned. So every Norse Greenlander who lived between 985 and 1450 descended from survivors. But they were survivors of a reduced population, genetically bottlenecked, economically weakened, struggling from the start. The ocean currents near Cape Farewell remain dangerous today. The East Greenland Current brings cold water south. The Erminger Current brings warmer water north. They collide, create turbulence, waves build higher, winds shift unpredictably. Modern ships with GPS and weather radar still treat that area with respect. In 985, Eric's fleet had nothing but experience and luck. 14 ships had enough luck. 11 didn't. Picture the last moments of one of those ships. It's night. Maybe the storm hit after sunset. You can't see the waves until they are on you. The ship rises, crests, drops. Someone shouts. Water crashes over the side. Too much. The ship's low in the water already. This wave doesn't drain off. It stays. Sloshes in the bilge. Another wave. More water. People start bailing. Leather buckets, wooden scoops, bail faster. But more water comes in than goes out. Ship's settling. You realize it's over. Maybe you have time to hold your family. Maybe not. Cold water rising to your knees, your waist. And the thing is, you're not the only one. This is happening on multiple ships, scattered across miles of dark ocean, each one sinking alone, each family dying alone. No witnesses except the other dying. The ships that survived couldn't see it happen. Too dark, too far. They sailed on. By morning, 11 ships weren't there anymore. Just empty ocean. The recovered artifact from the National Museum of Denmark tells a small story. A wooden spindle whorl found at a farm site in the eastern settlement, dated to the early settlement period, late 10th century. Someone carried that whorl from Iceland, probably in her personal kit. She would have used it to spin wool throughout the voyage. Productive work, kept hands busy, kept mind occupied. That spindle whorl made it to Greenland, so its owner survived. But how many spindle whorls went down with the lost ships? How many women spun wool on the crossing, keeping their skills sharp, preparing for the work ahead, then drowned before using those skills to build the colony? The artifact that survives represents all the artifacts that didn't. The Norse had a concept, word, fate, destiny, but not destiny as predetermined path. Destiny as the accumulated weight of past actions creating present circumstances. The 11 ships that sank in 985 weren't word. They were weather, physics, overloaded vessels and bad seas, but the consequences were word. The reduced population, the weakened colony, the eventual abandonment, all of that flowed from that crossing. From Eric's decision to bring 25 ships in one fleet instead of spreading the risk. From settlers, decisions to trust one man's promise. From North Atlantic weather patterns in summer 985. Chain of causation stretching across centuries. The last piece comes from Icelandic records. The Grenlandingathar, part of the Flatey-Jarbók manuscript written around 1390, lists names of prominent settlers who went with Eric. Herjolf Bardason, his son Bjarni, Eirik's sons Leif, Thorvald, Thorstein, his daughter Freydis. But the Thatar doesn't list everyone, just the important ones, the ones whose descendants became important. The farmers and weavers and children who drowned don't get named. They're statistics, background. But they were real as Eric, real as Leif, just unluckier. Their fate is ours eventually. Everyone drowns in time's ocean. Vikings knew that, which is why they cared about reputation, being remembered, leaving a saga. But most don't leave sagas. Most leave nothing but bones, or not even that, just absence, the shape of a person subtracted from the world. In 2019, archaeologists examined submerged sites off Greenland's coast looking for shipwrecks. Wooden hulls don't survive well in cold water, but they found ballast stones, rocks used to stabilize ships, patterns suggesting deliberate placement. Could be Viking, could be later. Dating underwater sites is hard, but the possibility exists that somewhere offshore, maybe near Cape Farewell, lie the remains of one of those 11 ships, buried in silt. Ballast stones still in position after 1,000 years. Around them, nothing. No bones, no artifacts. Cold water scatters everything, but the stones remain, the stones remember. The story ends in Kasiarsuk. Modern Greenlandic town built on the site of Brattahlid, Eric's farm, foundation stones still visible. The church site marked, in summer, grass grows green, same grass Eric saw. In winter, ice locks the fjord solid. Tourist boats visit in high season. People walk the same ground Eric walked, stand where he stood. But mostly they take photos and leave. The deep history stays buried. The 11 ships, the 200 dead. The families who trusted Eric and died because of it, that story sits beneath the surface. Uncomfortable. Cold. Here's what sits in the archaeological record at the National Museum of Denmark. Item 35-14/2 from the Eastern Settlement excavation. Small wooden cross, roughly carved. Found in a grave dated to late 10th century. Someone wore that cross. Converted Christian, maybe after arrival, maybe before. Buried with it. That person survived the crossing, but someone on one of the lost ships probably wore a similar cross. Prayed to the Christian god or the Old Norse gods for protection during the storm. Prayers didn't work. Gods don't stop waves. The person who owned the surviving cross got lucky. That's all. Not divine favor, not virtue. Luck, right ship, right moment. That's the difference between artifact in a museum and body at the bottom of the North Atlantic. So, when you hear about Vikings as unstoppable warriors conquering the sea, remember 985. Remember 11 ships. Remember that the North Atlantic killed Norse families the same way it killed everyone else who underestimated it. The ocean doesn't care about your ship's design, or your navigator's skill, or your faith in gods, or your dreams of Greenland. The ocean is cold and big and indifferent, and in summer 985, it took roughly 200 people who thought they were starting a new life. They were wrong. They were ending their lives, just slowly. Over hours and hours in cold water, families holding each other as their core temperatures dropped and hypothermia shut down their brains, and they stopped being conscious and slipped underwater. That's how the Norse Greenland colony began, with 180 ghosts at the bottom of the Denmark Strait, with families who never arrived, with children who died before their lives started. The artifact sits in Copenhagen, the cross, item 35-14/2. Behind glass, climate controlled, preserved, and somewhere offshore, maybe 300 meters down, lie ballast stones from a Nar that left Iceland in summer 985. Around those stones, nothing remains of the families. Just silt and cold water and darkness. That's the fate nobody talks about, the unspoken part of Viking expansion. For every settlement that succeeded, people died getting there. For every farm built, families drowned attempting the crossing. For every saga written about heroes, silent absence of the ones who didn't survive to be written about, the ocean keeps those stories, and it doesn't give them back.